This video will be about rational expressions. So when we say the word rational, we often mean fractions. So these are fractions that involve numbers and variables. So when you go to simplify a rational expression, there's really only two steps, which is to factor, then cancel. Now the factoring step can be a problem though, because there are so many different ways you can factor. So let's start with the easiest way to factor. So let's say we have 6x plus 12 over x plus 2. So we're going to start by doing greatest common factor. We want to check each of these and see, is there anything that divides into both numbers? So like I know 2 divides into 6 and 2 divides into 12. But really I want the biggest factor. So 3 works, 3 divides into 6 and 3 divides into 12, that's bigger. But there's one even bigger, 6. 6 divides into both of these. So once we've found the greatest common factor, that number goes in front of one set of parentheses, and then our actual division will go inside. 6x divided by 6x is 1x. 12 divided by 6 is 2. So now we check the bottom. Is there anything that divides into both 1x and into 2? Well, the only thing that works is 1. When that is the case, we do not need to do the greatest common factor. So we would just leave this as x plus 2. Now we are looking for things that are alike that will cancel. And when we're looking for things to cancel, it has to be the entire group. So like x plus 2 is one group inside of this parenthesis. So it can cancel with the x plus 2 on the bottom, but only because the entire thing matches. If you had only x on the bottom, we couldn't cancel. But since they match completely, all we are left with is a 6. So let's try another one. Say we have 2x minus 5 over 3x plus 6. Again, we're going to look for the greatest common factor. So it divides into 2 and into 5. Well, the only thing is 1, so we can skip the greatest common factor. Right on the bottom, the only thing that divides into 3 and into 6 is 3. So we're going to divide both of these by 3. So we have 2x minus 5 on top and 3 parentheses. 3x divided by 3 is 1x. You do not have to put the 1 in front. Positive 6 divided by 3 is positive 2. Now looking at this, we don't have anything that matches. We don't have an x plus 2 and x plus 2 on top and bottom, or 2x minus 5, 2x minus 5 top and bottom. So this doesn't actually simplify any further. You could factor, and in fact they may leave it as the original. They may not even leave it in factored form. Okay, so next type of factoring. We will still greatest common factor. You should always check for greatest common factor. So like the top one, both of those divide by 2. 2x divided by 2 is 1x. 12 divided by 2, negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. So the top was still greatest common factor, but now the bottom has 3 terms. One of those is an x squared. We should still check for greatest common factor though, even though it's different. Now remember, there's really a 1 in front of the x squared. And anytime you end up with a 1, the greatest common factor is 1. All these would only divide by 1. So we can, in fact, skip greatest common factor, but you should always, always check. So now that we've checked for greatest common factor, the way we factor something with 3 terms like this is we are looking for numbers that multiply to be positive 6 and also add to be negative 7. So it's easier to start with your numbers that multiply to be positive 6. I know 2 times 3 is positive 6. I know negative 2 times negative 3 would be positive 6. I also know 1 times 6 would be positive 6, and negative 1 times negative 6 would be positive 6. These are all our possible combinations. So now we're going to check, do these add to be 7. And you can probably see the correct one right off. 2 plus 3 is 5. Negative 2 plus negative 3 is negative 5. 1 plus 6 is 7. Negative 1 plus negative 6 gives you negative 7. So these are the correct numbers. And the way we write this out is this ends up with 2 parentheses. The numbers we find are the last half of each parenthesis. And the beginning of each parenthesis will be x, because we're splitting up the x squared. We know x squared is really x times x. One of those go in each parenthesis. So now x minus 6 and x minus 6, there is our matching piece, and that will cancel. And they only cancel because we're going top to bottom. So now our final answer, we have a 2 in the numerator and an x minus 1 in the denominator. So I would like to show 2 more examples that are variations on different ways you can factor. So we have 2x squared minus 10x over 12x squared minus 18x. Again, we always check for greatest common factor. With 2 and 10, both of those divide by 2. But because they also have variables, both of them have the letter x, we can actually divide both of these by 2x. So even though we have a variable now, that still goes in front. 2x squared divided by 2x. We do 2 divided by 2 first, that's 1. X squared divided by x. If you have 2 of them on top and only 1 on bottom, it'll cancel so that you have 1 left. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. And x divided by x would just cancel each other out. So 2x times 1x minus 5. Then we do the same thing on the bottom, greatest common factor. 12x squared and 18x. 12 and 18 have a couple that will divide in again, but we want the biggest, and the largest one that divides into both of them is 6x. So 12x squared divided by 6x. 12 divided by 6 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 18 divided by 6 is negative 3. X divided by x cancels. So our parentheses do not match. They will not cancel this time, but our numbers and letters in front can also cancel. We have an x over x which cancels, and our 2 over 6 will act like a fraction. They don't divide, it'd have to be a big number over the smaller number to actually divide. So we just want to reduce this fraction, and it acts the same way as our factoring. What divides into both of them? Well, they both divide by 2. So that would leave us, we'd have 1 technically, but we don't have to write a 1 in front. Same thing here, we don't have to write that 1. So we'd have x minus 5 over, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3. Outside 2x minus 3. And we don't necessarily have to write the parentheses on top anymore because it ended up a 1 in front. So last factoring problem, 2c squared minus 2 over 3 minus 3c squared. So what divides into both 2c squared and into 2? Well, that's 2. 2c squared divided by 2 is c squared. 2 divided by 2 is negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And then on the bottom, they both divide by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and negative 3c squared divided by 3 is negative c squared. Now these almost match, but the bottom is in the wrong order. And when there is a negative value, we can actually factor out a negative 1 on top of what we already factored out. The reason we would want to do that is because if we divide both of these by negative 1, that'll change the c squared to positive, so it matches there, and change the 1 to negative, so it matches there. So we're going to factor out our negative 1. This will be 3 times the negative 1. That divides out to be negative 1. That becomes positive c squared. But we want to switch that order so that it looks exactly the same and can cancel. So really we have c squared minus 1. So these cancel, which leaves us with 2 over negative 3. So the last thing they'll ask you to do in this section is to do a word problem. So find the baking time for a loaf of bread that is 4 inches long and has a radius of 3 inches. Round your answer to the nearest minute, and you're given an equation, 30RH over R plus H. So this one just wants you to plug the values in and simplify. They said it's 4 inches long, H stands for height, and the radius of 3 inches, R stands for radius. So we'd have 3 times a radius of 3, 30 times a radius of 3, times a height of 4, over a radius of 3 plus 4. I put the top in parentheses because they were directly next to each other with no plus or minus sign in between, so they need parentheses around it. So the top we're multiplying. 30 times 3 is 90, then times 4 is 360. Now on the bottom we're adding. 3 plus 4 is 7. So once you've simplified the numerator, simplified the denominator, now you're going to actually do the division. It will come out as a decimal, so you would need a calculator. 360 divided by 7 is 51.4. That's to the nearest minute, which means we want the nearest whole number. So 1 is what we want to decide if it's going to stay a 1 or round up to a 2. Next to it is a 4, so it stays as 51 minutes. So that concludes our discussion on rational expressions.